To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, go to gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. In 1968, everyone thought President Lyndon B. Johnson would win the Democratic nomination and serve another term. But, sidebar, a lot had changed since he won in 1964. He had promised not to get more involved in the Vietnam War and did exactly the opposite. That opened an opportunity for other candidates like an obscure senator named Eugene McCarthy, who eked out 42% of the Democratic vote in the New Hampshire primary versus the just under 50% that went to Johnson. That led to another anti-war candidate, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, joining the primary chaos. Around this time, people were realizing how unwinnable the Vietnam War really was, so Johnson pulled himself out of the race. And while that might sound like the end of the story, it was just the beginning. Because before we had the primary elections of today, people didn't really have a say in who their parties picked as nominee for president. When all of this happened in '68, the Democratic Party chose a candidate who hadn't even entered, let alone won a primary. So thousands of people protested in the streets of Chicago and faced police violence in return. No big surprise, but then Republican candidate Richard Nixon ended up winning the election, and Democrats had to change their system for how they pick a nominee. So if you've ever wondered how all this primary stuff works, then this episode's for you, because it's not just about general election day. You can make your voice heard in the primaries too. Hi, I'm Carmela Boykin, and this is Study Hall, Power and Politics in U.S. Government. U.S. elections are divided into two phases. First, there's the nomination phase, where all the possible candidates make their case, and the political parties narrow down their choices in the primary. Then, those candidates move on to the second phase and go head-to-head in the general election, which decides who will go into office. We need both phases because in the 2016 presidential election, for example, the Republicans started off with 17 major candidates. There really is such a thing as having too many options. But weirdly, there's not a lot the Constitution has to say about primaries, and so the rules governing this first round of voting vary a lot from state to state, with different types of primary elections. In a closed primary, you can only vote for candidates from your own political party. So if you're a registered Democrat, you can choose from the candidates on the Democratic ballot, but you can't vote for a Republican or Green Party candidate. If you're not affiliated with a political party, well, the rules depend on the state and the party running the primary. While in an open primary, all voters can choose which primary they vote in, regardless of their affiliation. So, a registered Republican could choose to vote on the Green Party ballot, and a registered Democrat could vote on the Republican ballot. It gives voters the greatest choice and allows every voter a chance to participate. But the risk of open primaries is they can lead to something called party raiding. And that doesn't mean we're heading out to the high seas. Party raiding is when members of a political party choose to vote in an opposing party's primary to try and get a weaker candidate on the general election ballot. Like how in 2008, radio host Rush Limbaugh told his Republican listeners to vote for Hillary Clinton in open primaries. That would keep Clinton and Obama fighting each other for as long as possible and weaken whoever would eventually become the candidate. Another way of doing things is the nonpartisan blanket primary, also called the top two primary method. In the 4 states that use it, every candidate, regardless of party affiliation, appears on the same ballot, and the two with the most votes then become the candidates for the general election, whether they're from the same party or not. Alaska actually chooses the top 4, but it's the same idea. But note, these generally aren't used for presidential races. There's a lot to keep track of when it comes to primary elections, so it's worth spending time researching the rules in your state. And if navigating all of that wasn't complicated enough, I regret to inform you that there's also another, entirely different way that some states handle the nomination phase of an election: the caucus. The caucus is a U.S. invention from pre-revolution Boston. The Caucus Club was an informal meeting where the Boston community leaders debated public issues and picked candidates for the general election. Today, there are still in-person caucuses held to vote on candidates, but they look really different from regular elections. Instead of casting a vote on a ballot, at a caucus, party members publicly declare their support by either standing in a certain place around the room, dropping marbles in a jar, or just saying it out loud. One of the strengths of a caucus is it leaves no secrets about how or why the state party is choosing who to support. But they can take a long time and be pretty intimidating for people. So caucuses usually see about 20% less turnout than primary elections. The goal is to choose delegates, or the people who go to the national party conventions to represent their state. The whole job of a delegate today is pretty much symbolic, with each convention's main goal being to show the strength of a party. But it's a time-honored tradition that doesn't seem to be going anywhere, even if it's not mandated in the Constitution. But no matter what nominating system a state uses for the conventions, scheduling these elections is a contest all on its own. Traditionally, the first two states to have their caucus and primary election, Iowa and New Hampshire, have been vital to a candidate securing the nomination. But not everyone thinks that's fair. Iowa and New Hampshire are pretty small and aren't really representative of the rest of the country. In effect, bigger states with more registered voters have less of a say in the nomination process, since candidates start to drop out of the race based on their performance in early primaries. So, states started moving up their presidential nomination contests. This phenomenon is called front-loading, and it compresses the nomination period and forces candidates to campaign earlier and across many states. Front-loading tends to favor candidates who already have name recognition and money, and it makes the general election period stretch out even longer. So, party leaders on both sides have tried to prevent front-loading by passing guidelines for scheduling primaries. States that don't listen lose delegates and influence at the convention. Then, something interesting happened. In February 2023, the Democratic National Committee announced that South Carolina will go first because it better reflects the diversity of the party and country. Not to mention the Iowa caucus takes so long that it disadvantages hourly workers. Then, Nevada and New Hampshire will share the second slot on the calendar, and Georgia and Michigan will be fourth and fifth. Though whether this calendar will be followed is still an open question, especially since New Hampshire has a law on the books that their primary is first. But with the calendar set, the real work begins, and that means raising money. The period between when potential candidates declare their interest and the first nomination contests are held is called the invisible primary. It's an essential time because early leads in fundraising, endorsements, media coverage, and polling show strength in a campaign, which can lead to more support later. And support equals campaign contributions. The amount of money coming in matters because elections have only gotten more expensive over time. The 2020 presidential election alone cost $6.6 billion, mostly on advertisement, salaries, and other administrative costs. The four sources of campaign contributions are 1. Self-financing, or money that comes from the candidate themselves. 2. Small individual contributions of $200 or less each. 3. Large individual contributions of more than $200 but less than the maximum allowed. And 4. Political action committees, or PACs, which exist to raise money and contribute to candidates' campaigns. In the early 70s, the Federal Election Campaign Act created rules on campaign contributions and how they get reported. The Independent Federal Election Commission enforces these campaign finance laws. They limit how much money people can contribute to different campaigns to prevent any specific individual or company from having too much influence in an election. But over time, political parties and PACs found loopholes, and it became clear that reforms were needed. So Congress passed the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, also known as the McCain-Feingold Act. It placed limits on the total contributions that companies and PACs could give to political parties, required candidates to personally endorse political ads, and limited ads directly funded by unions and corporations in the days leading up to the elections. Naturally, the act was immediately challenged in court, and in 2010, a decision by the Supreme Court in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission reshaped how money impacts our elections. Citizens United, a conservative nonprofit, wanted to advertise a documentary critical of Hillary Clinton. They also wanted to make it available on TV within the prohibited 30-day period before the 2008 presidential primaries. But that wasn't allowed under the McCain-Feingold Act because the documentary clearly advocated against Clinton. Instead of just deciding whether or not Citizens United's movie could be played, the Supreme Court went further. They removed corporate spending limits as long as the money is independent of the candidates in question. The Supreme Court basically said the McCain-Feingold Act violated corporations' free speech. That decision was followed up by a federal court case, SpeechNow.org versus FEC, which paved the way for super PACs. Despite their name, super PACs aren't super or PACs. They're technically independent, expenditure-only committees, so they have different rules. Campaign contributions are limited for individuals contributing to regular PACs, but super PACs can ask for and receive unlimited amounts of money. They just can't contribute directly to a candidate's campaign or a political party, like how a regular PAC can. And they're not supposed to coordinate with the candidate, though that line is blurrier than a lot of people would like it to be. But super PACs act independently, and they spend a lot of money on things like ads and events for the candidate they support. In 2020, super PACs spent over $2 billion on the election. And as of July 2023, there are 2,476 super PACs in the US, with most contributions coming from very few wealthy individuals. One reaction to the domination of big money in politics is the increase in small donor contributions. During the 2020 elections, 3 times as many small donors contributed to federal candidates than in 2016, making up 27% of contributions overall. And some candidates are making that part of their platform and pledging not to take PAC contributions for re-election, like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, also known as AOC. During her 2018 campaign, 62% of her campaign contributions came from small donors. It can be easy to look at the money spent on some candidates and think that any other candidate is a lost cause. But nationwide grassroots efforts have advocated for increased small donor spending and public financing, where the city or state matches the voter's donation, as an antidote to big money campaign spending. Still, it can feel like elections never end because the campaigning and fundraising never stops. And as a voter, that endless cycle can get really annoying if you don't actually like the final candidates. People often say they'd rather have options outside the 2 major parties, but voting for a third-party candidate feels like wasting their vote. In reality, the primary election is the most critical time to show support for a newer or more diverse slate of candidates. That's when we find out who and what people actually support outside of whoever seems the most famous. In the 2020 elections, Joe Biden had name recognition from being vice president, and he's a pretty moderate Democrat. But during the Democratic primaries, Bernie Sanders, with much more progressive views, won 26% of the popular vote. That's not something the Democratic Party can simply overlook. Because just like in 1968, people want to feel heard and like they have a say in the political process. Primaries are an often overlooked way that people can tell those in charge what kind of future they really want for our country. If you're enjoying Study Hall Power in Politics and U.S. Government and are interested in taking an online course and earning college credit, go to gostudyhall.com or click the button to learn more. Thanks for watching and see you next time.